I want to talk about how we graph a square root function. So a square root function is kind of the opposite of a parabola, and that makes it look like a sideways parabola. But it only looks like half of it, because otherwise it wouldn't be a function, right? If we had a sideways parabola, it would look like that, but then it wouldn't pass the vertical line test. So because you can't have the square root of a negative number, and because it doesn't give you a negative number out, it ends up just looking like half of a parabola, or like that, roughly. So the best way to graph a square root function is to first figure out what the leftmost point is going to be. So you want to look for the leftmost point. Okay, so the leftmost point is going to be basically the last point in the domain, or the place where the square root is going to equal 0. So what's going to happen is the stuff under the square root, it can't be negative. So the very first or last, depending on which way you're thinking about it, but the leftmost point is going to be the point where the stuff under the square root is equal to 0. So we can say x plus 2, where does that equal 0? Well, it equals 0 when x equals negative 2. So that's going to be the leftmost point, where x equals negative 2. Now, it's easy to figure out what other points are there. We can just plug in some other points once we know that leftmost point. So we know we're not going to put in anything to the left of that. So we're not going to put in negative 3 or negative 4, because those wouldn't be in the domain. If we had a negative 4, that would be the square root of negative 4 plus 2, which is negative 2. That's not in our domain, so we don't need to worry about those points. But let's go to the right from here. So just to make my life easy, I'm going to use small numbers, so I'll put in negative 1, 0, and 1. So let's go ahead and put in negative 2. So negative 2 plus 2 is 0, so the square root of 0 is 0. That's just what we expected. Negative 1, so if I put in negative 1 here, plus 2 is 1. The square root of 1 is 1. If I put in 0, 0 plus 2 is the square root of 2. And then if I put in 1, that would be the square root of 3. Now, you might not want to graph those points because they're hard to graph, so we can keep trying some other points. If you put in 2, you have the square root of 2 plus 2, which is 4. Which is the square root of 4, which is 2. So 2 is 2. If you really wanted to figure out another point that's going to come out to a whole number, we can think about what's going to give us a 9 under the square root, so that would be x equals 7. Will give us 9 under the square root, so that would be 3. So if you want to figure out whole number points, you can. If you don't care, it's okay either way. So negative 2 comma 0 is our first point. And then we have negative 1, 1. So that's here. 0 is the square root of 2, which is like 1.41 something, so a little less than 1.5. I'll skip to 2, so 2 is 2, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is 1, 2, 3. Okay, so you can see this sideways parabola shape is here. Okay, but it's only half of the parabola. So let's go ahead and try another graph similar to this. So I'll go ahead and leave this part up. So let's try f of x is equal to the square root of x minus 1 plus 3. So let's try this one. So we're going to find the leftmost point in the same way. So the leftmost point is where x minus 1, where x minus 1 equals 0, which is where x equals 1. So that's our leftmost point. Also, again, if you think about the domain, it's the starting point of the domain, right? The domain of this would be from, it's anywhere where this is going to be at least 0. So x minus 1 needs to be greater than or equal to 0, which means that x needs to be greater than or equal to 1. So our domain would be from 1 to infinity. So the leftmost point is the starting point of the domain, the leftmost point in the domain. Okay, so x equals 1 is our leftmost point, so we can go ahead and make a chart. X, y, start with 1, we can do 2. Again, if you want to stick with whole numbers, we can try to figure out what can we put in here. So if we put in a 5, that should give us a whole number. If we put in 10, that will give us a whole number, but that would be off of our graph. But we can do that anyway. So if we put in 10, that'll be a whole number. Okay. So now we need to plug in our points. So 1 minus 1 is 0. That's what it should be. The square root of 0 is 0. Plus 3 is 3. 2 minus 1 is 1. The square root of 1 is 1. Plus 3 is 4. 5 minus 1 is 4. The square root of 4 is 2. Plus 3 is 5. 10 minus 1 is 9. The square root of 9 is 3. Plus 3 is 6. So 1 is 3, and this is our leftmost point. 2 is 4. 5, 2, 3, 4, 5 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then that 10, 6 is going to be somewhere off of our graph, but we can go ahead and use these points to graph. And that is how you graph a square root function, and it's the best way to start is to start with that leftmost point.